You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, Broadway, showbiz stories, news and gossip, with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today we talk with author and television editor for the New York Post, Michael Starr. And now, here's Julian, Arthur, and Steve.
Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. This is great.
Arthur knows you very well, so I'm going to direct the first question to Mr. Arthur Friedman.
Well, first of all, Michael, it's good to see you. Good to have you in Hollywoodland. I want to just say, of course, at the top for our listeners, you're being the editor of television for the New York Post. You've been around the world of TV for a long time. There's so much going on in TV right now, certainly from the industry standpoint of view of hearing about streaming and cable and linear and what have you. What are your thoughts on the state of television today and where it's going?
I think the state of television, barring the recent strike, which has made it difficult for people to work and for us to interview celebrities and stuff, is healthy. As far as the streaming and pretty much cable, I think the broadcast networks are suffering mightily, and I'm not writing them off completely. But nowadays, if a series premieres on Fox, ABC, NBC, CBS, and gets 4 million viewers, that's considered almost a breakout hit. Where 10 or 15 years ago, it would have been canceled after one or two episodes. So the bar has been lowered as far as broadcast television, and they're trying, but I think they're losing out to the streaming networks, who right now are just dominating the television broadcasting landscape.
The one thing that is always popular, it seems, is sports. I saw the other day a piece in the paper that the New York Knicks and opening night guys drew 2.5 million viewers. If you take any average NFL football game on Sunday at 4:00, you're looking at 15 to 25 million viewers for football.
That's a good point, Arthur. And I should point that out with broadcast. But now you have Prime Video and Hulu and some others actually streaming sports. So again, it cuts in a little bit to that if you don't have the NFL on CBS or Thursday Night Football, which actually was on Prime, I believe. Yeah. So it's a tough road for them to hoe, but they're going to have to adjust. I mean, just like, I'm in the newspaper business and print has been dying, and, we're trying to adjust to that. And you try to do what you can to keep the audience that you do have.
I'm interested, Mike, thank you for joining us, in the fact that you've written so many books on show business characters. I think if I counted correctly, the Rodney Dangerfield coming up is going to be the 10th.
That's correct.
I wanted to ask you, what makes you decide who you want to go after? Because I'm trying to analyze. You have Ringo Starr and Joey Bishop. Okay, well, they're the kind of the back guys on the Rat Pack and the Ringo and Beatles. But, I mean, it's all over the place. It's seemingly. But I'm sure it has something to do with your taste and feeling about wanting to learn more about them.
Yes, and a lot of it also depends on whether or not they've been written about in book form, prior to me tackling the subject. Now, for the most part, there was a book about Ringo Starr that came out in the 90s. It wasn't, maybe even the late 80s. It wasn't very good. So nobody had really written about Ringo per se. And it was also tied to when I signed the deal, he was going to turn 25 in 3 or 4 years. I don't remember. So it was pegged to his 75th birthday. He's now 83. But yes, a lot of it is when you write a book, you have to be willing to spend a lot of time with your subject. Metaphorically, of course, unless you're interviewing them. And I have a taste for a specific era of show business, 40s, 50s, 60s.
Like us.
Yeah, Red Fox was a little different, but although he started in the 30s and 40s, didn't really hit it big till the early 70s with Sanford and Son, but he was around. And I always like these stories of people who seem to be overnight sensations. And they're not. because they put the work in and they played all the crappy clubs in the world, and they supporting roles in movies and TV shows, and in some cases radio shows. And it's just, it always interests me. As far as, the Raymond Burr, which was a favorite book of mine to do, one of my favorites. I mean, he had such an illustrious career as a B-movie actor, which a lot of people don't know about. They just think he just popped on the screen as Perry Mason. And it's he did to a lot of people, but he had quite a career as the heavy in movies, including Rear Window, the Alfred Hitchcock hit.
Lars Thorwald.
Lars Thorwald, right. So I always like to find those little kind of interesting facts about people. I'm working on a book right now about Rodney Dangerfield, who, when he appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, it was his big break for the first time, he was 45. My math is bad. 45 going on 46. He didn't come from anywhere. I mean, he had a prior stand-up comedy career in the 40s for about 10 years, didn't really go anywhere. And then he quote unquote retired and sold aluminum siding for 10 years.
As Jack Roy.
Was arrested by the FBI in a scam. He didn't go to jail. He paid a fine.
So he got some respect.
We got some respect from law enforcement. That's for sure.
Yeah.
He and about 10 other guys.
Well, it was interesting about Art Carney. I got to know Paul Mazursky, who wrote and directed Harry and Tonto, and he told me that Art Carney was not his first choice. His first choice was Danny Kaye, and he went to Danny Kaye, who read the script and said, "I want to give you a whole bunch of changes." And Paul Mazursky said, "Bye, Danny."
Julian, what was that movie?
Harry and Tonto.
Tonto.
Where Art Carney, as I know Mike knows, won the Academy Award.
He did. He won the Oscar.
And I think it was his first movie.
It was his first big movie. He had done in the 60s. Roles. Yeah, he did a cameo with Lucille Ball in a movie called The Guide for the Married Man. He did a movie with George C. Scott called The Yellow Rolls Royce. But these are movies that sort of came and went quickly. But yes, Harry and Tonto was his first big starring role. And he walked away with the Oscar. And, he starred with a marmalade cat, and he didn't like cats. There's a quote in the book, of memory serves, where he says he was kind of holding his nose every time he had to pick that cat up.
He also was only 55 years old and turned it down originally because he said, "I'm too young to play the role." And Paul and Mazursky told me that he said, "Well, look, you're a spry 72-year-old." And that's how he got him.
Well, look, I mean, Red Fox when he filmed the pilot was for Sanford and Son, was 49. I mean, they aged him up. You'd think he was 75. He played the part well.
Michael, when I was years ago, I worked at the Colony Record Shop, which is where I met Bobby Darin, 1957. We used to sell Red Fox albums under the counter.
Yes.
There was such a thing. It's kind of like when you went to drugstores, they'd have Trojans and the Sheiks under the counter. You had to keep them away from people's eyes. It wasn't happening.
Brown paper bag.
But Red Fox was absolutely a thing in the business, but known within the industry. And then all of a sudden that thing happened when he was probably, how old was he when Sanford happened?
When he filmed the pilot, he was 49.
49. Okay.
49. Yeah.
Yeah.
He had, as you say, had that whole career as, King of the Party Records and Laugh of the Party, which sold God knows how many millions. And
he played Vegas at the end of the Strip, whatever that hotel was. Julian, you remember that?
Oh yeah, Tropicana.
No, it was beyond the Tropicana. It was today. It's all built up.
Maybe that was the Hoover Dam.
There was a hotel out there, and that's Red Fox starred there all the time.
Oh
yeah,
and the Aladdin, was it the Aladdin?
No, it was way beyond that. Way beyond
the last major hotel on the Strip in those days was the Sahara. And across from it was the Stardust. Maybe he was in one of those.
No, I'm sorry. Huh? It's way. If you go to where the Tropicana was, it is further out, probably by about a half a mile to a mile. It's all built up now. He was the star, and he would do a lot of business in those days. Michael, I have something for you on Don Rickles. What made you do Rickles? Did you ever interview him? How did that work?
I did interview Don for the paper maybe 4 or 5 times. The last time about a year and a half before he passed away, and you could tell he did not sound great. He was complaining a lot about his leg, which he had several operations on his leg, and he died about a year and a half later. But he was great. I mean, he did what, and as I point out in the book, he did what reporters hoped he would do when you called him. He'd insult you for a few minutes, do a shtick, get that out of the way, and then he was like the nicest guy in the world. And what do you want to ask me? What do you want to talk about?
So you got the sweet spot. You got the. I
really liked him a lot. And again, he passed away in 2017. The book came out 5 years later, so it was sort of a 5-year anniversary kind of thing. But I liked him. I liked his humor. I grew up watching him on the Dean Martin Celebrity Roasts and CPO Sharkey, which lasted 2 seasons, which for Don was a long time. And of course, The Tonight Show. I mean, with he and Rodney Dangerfield are probably 2 of the all-time best guests with Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show.
Well, it does turn out, Mike, that you did 6. If with Rodney will be the 6th out of 10 that dealt in comedy. That much I was able to figure out. 6 out of 10 people were dealt in comedy, so that was
there's a little bit of a theme there, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's Joey Bishop, and that's the first of your books that I read. Great book on Joey Bishop. Again, a guy who schlepped around for such a long time. Love your title, The Mouse of the Rat Pack. But what a quick read, great read. Michael's books are wonderful reads. They're quick, bam, he gets right to it. Raymond Burr. Just want to mention for a fast second. I knew of someone who worked for Raymond Burr, and he told me one of his fetishes. I think the title of your book is
"Hiding in Plain Sight."
Hiding in Plain Sight. Yeah, he happened to be gay, but one of his fetishes was he buying silk underwear from a shop in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and it was coming in like $900 a month for these silk underwear. So a friend of mine who worked for him said, "Ray, don't you have a change of underwear?" I mean, he said, "No, I throw them out. Are you kidding? Silk underwear I got to have every day. It's got to be something new." What a habit.
I always loved the fact that when they made the Godzilla movie for the American audience, they needed to, I guess, it couldn't just be a bunch of people talking with Japanese subtitles. So they created this character for Ray where he's this American reporter reporting from a window. I think the whole movie, he's in a window looking out on the Japanese skyline. There's Godzilla.
Yeah, his name in that movie was Steve Martin, as a matter of fact. It was reporter Steve Martin. And years later, he did I don't remember what year it was, they did a sequel. And he was game enough to do the sequel. He actually, I think, had a very dry, good sense. He never had a sense of humor, which didn't come across in Perry Mason. He was very, stern, and you never saw any of his private life except very early on. Occasionally you'd see him in his apartment in his robe, getting a call from Paul Drake or something. But he had a good sense of humor, and the people that I interviewed for the book that worked closely with him, Barbara Hale particularly, I mean, they loved him. They really did.
I wonder what it was like playing a whole role in a wheelchair when he came to do Ironside. What was he comfortable doing that? Or
I think he came to regret that. And one of the things about Raymond Burr, and this went back to when Perry Mason became a big success, he started squawking about working too hard. I need more vacation. I'm going to call, he's out sick again because, he probably wasn't sick, but he just didn't feel like shooting the show. So when he signed the deal for Ironside, yes, he was in the wheelchair. And then he started to complain that the way he was sitting when he looked up, the bright lights hurt his eyes. And that was his thing for several seasons, actually. I interviewed, I think it was Cy Chermak for the book, and he told me that story. And there were also, it was documented in press at the time how the lights hurt his eyes. But, it's almost like he dug his own hole in a way, because Perry Mason was such a huge success. And then you have to put the work in. He was the star, and he was in almost every scene, as he was with Ironside. But
right, of course.
They accommodated. I think the networks and the studios accommodated him as much as they could. for his tough work schedule.
It's interesting that William Shatner, another one of your people that you write about, a lot of people, like with Raymond Burr, have no idea that Shatner was a classically trained actor. Had played Broadway, had done Susie Wong, he had done the play with Julie Harris and Walter Matthau.
Shot in the Dark.
Thank you. Which turned out to be nothing to do with Peter Sellers' Shot in the Dark.
No.
But it is interesting about Shatner. Did you get a chance to talk with him or Nimoy or any of the people?
I didn't. Leonard Nimoy had already passed away by the time that I got to doing this book. I did put out. I included a little bit of that in the book. I did reach out to Shatner. Long story short, I did not speak to him. He did tell a few people that he would prefer if they didn't talk to me, but for the most part, I got who I was looking for. Yeah. And I think he knows, because he's still alive, obviously. I think he knows that he wasn't exactly top of choice for a lot of people to work with. He was difficult. He could be difficult.
Oh, he had a terrible.
You've heard the stories.
You're kind.
You've heard the stories about Star Trek. Yeah.
But no one can deny that when he came aboard to play Captain Kirk in the first Star Trek incarnation, he was terrific. What a perfect role for him.
Yes, I agree. And he made that show. I mean, Leonard Nimoy, if he was around, would probably argue with that. And those two had a very big competition on who was the real star of the show. And I think there's a story in the book about they once sort of like trapped Gene Roddenberry in his office and said, we want to know who is, as the creator, who is the real star? And I think he gave some kind of diplomatic answer, you both are, you both mean so much and blah, blah, blah. But in the beginning, Nimoy was getting more fan mail than Shatner and, stuck in Shatner's craw.
Steve, excuse me, who wrote the theme for Star Trek?
I don't know. We all know the theme.
Gene
but I don't
Roddenberry
remember.
did, actually.
Did he?
Yep, Gene actually did.
He wrote it?
Yes, he did.
Wow. Okay.
There's actually lyrics to it also, but I am not going to sing. Not today.
So you talk about learning interesting things. When I was doing I'm a big fan of Have Gun Will Travel with
Richard Boone.
Richard Boone, thank you. Gene Roddenberry wrote a lot of episodes for that show. You wouldn't think that was his forte or his milieu, but he did. Writing these westerns is strange.
And I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, but you'll help me. I don't think Shatner was the original captain. Wasn't there an actor, Jeffrey Hunter,
who made the pilot?
They made
the pilot with Jeffrey Hunter, and the executives felt it didn't work. They wanted somebody with was a little more animated, I guess. And the Shatners himself said they wanted somebody who had maybe showed a little more sense of humor. I mean, I'm not a Trekkie, so I'm just telling you from what I remember from when I wrote the book.
Michael or Julian, could you give us an example of what made Shatner difficult to work with?
Well, I knew Leonard Nimoy, so he gave me story and verse. I represented him on a movie he had called Death Watch, and he had made it with Vic Morrow, and he complained about Shatner and his ego, but I don't know how he pronounces it. Is it George Takei or Takei or
Takai?
Takai. I think he went public about it, didn't he, Mike?
Those two still fight. They're still fighting. They're in their 90s.
No.
Shatner got mad because he said Takai didn't invite him to his wedding. Yes, I did. He didn't respond. I mean, it's just this stupid stuff that goes back and forth. You'd think they would have buried the hatchet by now, but maybe it keeps them going. I don't know.
Michael, in writing about Rodney, did you get to like Rodney while you were writing about him, whether you knew him or not? Did you get to understand?
I did. I'm still in the process of writing it. But I like him a lot. I wasn't so sure I would, but the more people I speak to, I think the older he got and the more successful he got in his career, his demeanor changed to a much more amiable. And first of all, he smoked a lot of pot. So that made him very mellow for the most part anyway. He wrote about this himself. He was smoking pot since his early 20s. And he became a little nicer, I think, as the older he got and the more successful he got. But he was always very helpful to younger comedians, which I think everybody appreciated. A young guy, he he put a lot of guys that, they opened in his club in New York in Dangerfields. He had the 9th annual Young Comedian special on HBO with guys like Tim Allen and Sam Kinison, Rita Rudner, people
He
like
loved
that.
Kinison. He loved Kinison. Jesus.
He did.
Yeah.
He did.
And Jerry Seinfeld, I think. Seinfeld as well.
Seinfeld, yes. He was one of those guys who was on that, and Carol Leifer. And I mean, the list goes on. Harry Basil. I mean, and a lot of these people to this day say that was, knowing Rodney and getting on those HBO specials and working in Dangerfields was like.
Well, you're gonna have to interview Arthur again because he knew Rodney and was with him.
I knew Rodney good.
All right. Well,
Rodney was great. But Michael, what happened is that we had, a partner of mine and myself went to Warner Brothers to set up a remake of the movie Never Too Late, which was a great movie of its time, 1964, 65, and wanted to use Rodney as the father. I don't know if you guys remember the movie, but a good movie. Anyway, in mentioning his name to the head of the studio at Warner Brothers, he said, "We never mention his name here. We will not deal with Rodney anymore." That was when they tried to negotiate with him for the second Caddyshack.
Yes.
And he was impossible.
Well, yeah, he agreed to it. Then he bowed out. They were going to pay him like $7 million, and he wanted a lot of changes in the script. And, well, good for him, I think, in a way, because they ended up getting Jackie Mason and the movie bombed.
Oh,
there's a story that's circulating that regarding the Dangerfields nightclub in New York, that he and his partner were getting muscled by members of the organized crime family. Is that in your book?
I can't quite pin that down. His partner was he's still alive, Tony Bavacqua.
Right.
I don't know if they were getting muscled. I mean, there were a lot of mobbish kind of guys who hung out there, as did a lot of the guys from the NY. A lot of cops from New York hung out there too. It was like a place to go.
Right.
So I can't really confirm that he was being squeezed. The club did very well. It closed in 2020. It was around for 1969 to 2020. So if he was being squeezed, it was enough that he was getting by anyway, because
right.
He actually only performed there for like the first 8 or 9 years. And then he became so big that he couldn't even perform in his own club. Couldn't hold that many people. Lines were around the block. And by this time he was still doing venues nationwide, but a lot of stuff in Las Vegas too.
Yeah.
Now,
he was funny. Rodney Dangerfield was absolutely hysterical doing one-liners, which Henny Youngman was doing and wasn't quite that funny, but Rodney became huge. And I had seen him a couple of times come into a comedy club on the Strip out in L.A., and just during the show, he'd just walk up with his cards, his index cards, read a joke. If they laughed, he kept it. If they didn't laugh, he threw it out. And they'd walk off. There was no introduction, no nothing.
Yeah, he did that. He did that, Arthur. Also, he put a lot of thought and preparation into his appearances on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And I had some quotes in the book about this. He prepared. He had like maybe a couple hundred jokes. He would go to the Improv or Catch a Rising Star or whatever, go through the new jokes on the cards, as you said.
Yeah.
And to see what worked, what didn't work. He had sort of a, almost like a spreadsheet of jokes to tell what time, depending on whatever direction Johnny was going to lead him in. And he worked it all out. And I mean, it showed. He was brilliant on the show. The thing with Rodney, Rickles always had sort of the same, I love Rickles, but he always had the same shtick. He'd make fun of people, or, Ed McMahon, how you doing? That kind of thing. Or, give him a cookie, he'll go away. But, Rodney had different, he had to come out with different one-line. I mean, they might have been one-liners he was telling elsewhere, but they were new to the Tonight Show audience, put it that way. So he had to be fresh every time and have.
Well,
fun.
also, he was one of those comedians, and nobody did it better than Carson. When he bombed, he was great. It was funny when a joke didn't work.
Yeah. The thing, just back to Rickles for a second. The thing when he was on the Tonight Show with Sinatra, to me, those were the best. I mean, you knew what he was going to do, but still, it was just, Frank, I talked to Mongo Mangananzo in Jersey City. He started his car. Now he's all over the street, that kind of thing. It was Sinatra loved him, and it was great.
Nobody funnier than Don Rickles. I don't care anything. If there's an argument on Mount Rushmore, he's my number one. He's funny. I mean, Don Rickles was, and you're right. His routine was basically the same thing mixed up and put all over the place. I'm going to send you to go home. Hey, you got to go. You're spitting up keywords.
He would have had a lot of problem in the woke world, Don Rickles.
There's no way he would not last 5 minutes.
No, I saw him at the beginning of his career in lounges in Las Vegas for $5, no cover, 2 drink minimum, $5. That's it.
Unbelievable. And
he would go and just destroy people who came in as guests. He had Hal March from the $64,000 question. He killed Gene Barry. He just wiped people out. Nancy Wilson, beautiful singer, was in the big room, and he said she comes up and does his windows and cleans. I mean, he couldn't stop. And the one time I saw him, he just went on and on, killed everybody. And he said, look, at the end of his act, he said, I have nothing against race and religion and creed. I mean, look, I see Richard Pryor's in the audience. So let me end the show simply by saying, Richard Pryor, one of your people who said on the steps of Mobile, Alabama, all aboard.
Yeah.
It's funny even with you, Julian.
That's what people Rickles expected from Don Rickles, and he gave it to them. You know, there's a story in the book towards the end of his career, and this is sort of predates the woke stuff and cancel culture, but he had a little bit of a taste of it. He was at an American Film Institute tribute to Shirley MacLaine, and he got up to do his, Don Rickles, he got up to do his 4 minutes or whatever, making fun of her and Martin Scorsese and everybody else. And then he made a joke about, it was about President Obama's not here because he forgot his mop or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was like this stunned silence and murmurs, and 30 seconds later he had him back in the palm of his hand. But they cut that joke out when they aired this on TV. They cut the Obama joke out. So yeah. I think had he pursued that line of humor, the older he got, it wouldn't have been helpful for his career. He didn't need it by that point anyway. I mean,
I'm curious because you follow the media. Louis C.K. went and got into serious trouble with a lot of his crap, but now I hear he's filling auditoriums again. What's the story on him?
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. He made sort of a slow comeback by doing one-offs in small comedy clubs around the country, but I don't remember who it was. One of the women. There was a woman comic who came out and basically said, why, don't forgive him so fast, right. Just because he's coming back, blah, blah, blah. But he's out there. He's out there doing.
I got to ask you about Peter Sellers, because he's a little bit different than some of the people we've been talking about. I've followed his career since I first saw him in 1958, I think, in Tom Thumb with Terry Thomas.
Yes.
And he's such a brilliant performer in such odd, interesting characters. And of course, we all just went nuts with him over Dr. Strangelove and all the characters he played in Strangelove. Was he an interesting person to cover?
He was. And, people say, that guy's a nut. I think he really was seriously mentally ill. I mean, there was off camera, he was a nightmare.
Michael, I became friendly with Blake Edwards.
I interviewed him for the book, actually. Yeah,
I would think. But Blake said he was certified, that Sellers was certified to be nuts.
I would agree with that, and I think his family would tell you the same thing. He did not treat people well. But
how great was he? I mean, who was greater than Peter Sellers?
Right,
well, we all kind of know that genius often is very close to crazy.
Yeah,
some people think he was an undiagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, or he was bipolar. Surely, if you go back to look at his life and career, you can see that could have been a possibility. But my favorite Sellers movie, not the movie itself, but my favorite Sellers performance is as Claire Quilty in Lolita. I love him in that movie. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. If you haven't, check it out.
Yeah.
He just plays a bunch of different characters, and even as Claire Quilty, he's just funny and creepy at the same time. It's great.
I remember as a young kid seeing The Mouse That Roared and I'm All Right, Jack, and he and Terry Thomas. Oh, my God, we got so excited. It was a comedy like we had never seen in this country. It was just special. My mother-in-law was one of his psychics, one of his clairvoyants in England, and she loved him. He would come over in a limo and pick her up, and they'd go out for breakfast. And he was very big with clairvoyants and psychics. He believed a lot in the occult. He had a lot of what we might call in other countries, a lot of mishigas.
Michael, did Blake tell you the story about him getting it? He gets a call from Sellers at 3 a.m. and says that he spoke to God, and God told him to set the camera in a certain place. Oh my God! Yeah,
and Blake said something like, "If we'll have God come onto the set tomorrow and do my job for me or something."
We'll get him a chair.
When Sellers was filming Casino Royale, he was supposed to be in a scene with Orson Welles. But he called Wells, quote unquote, a bad witch. He didn't like his karma. Mm-hmm. So they had to basically film their scenes separately and then splice it together. And if you watch the movie, you can sort of tell that they are not in the same room. That's what he was like. He once fired a young woman from the set because she was wearing, I think it was purple, which was a bad color. I mean, it's just stuff like
that. Single funniest scene, in my opinion, in the entire history of film was Peter Sellers in the wheelchair as Dr. Strangelove. That scene, Blake told me they had to do it like 25 times.
There's part of that scene where if you watch, there's an actor named Peter Bull who played the Russian
heavy guy.
If you watch closely when Sellers is grabbing his arm like that, you can see Peter Bull smiling.
Right.
They didn't cut it out of the movie. I guess they had done so many takes, but you can see him almost losing it watching Sellers, grab his arm.
That movie ends with this battle royale pie fight. Because remember the buffet table is sitting in the war room and they start throwing pies back and forth. It goes on for about 5 minutes. And I guess there's a line where one of the pie tins hits Peter Sellers, who's playing the President Merkin Muffley, which I always thought was interesting. And there's a line that says, "The president has been struck by a pie," but apparently they felt it was not, considering Kennedy had been assassinated a few months earlier, they threw that line out and got rid of the pie fight. But he's great. One of the films that is more understated, one of his last films, is Being There, which is such an interesting movie. Interesting film.
He was nominated for an Oscar, and he always felt he lost the Oscar because they included outtakes at the end where he was, fluffing his line. I mean, they were funny outtakes, but he thought it ruined the whole mood of that he had set previously. I mean, maybe it was sour grapes. I don't know. But
Michael, back to Art Carney for a moment. When Art Carney was doing The Honeymoon, so he was just perfect, of course. What kind of money was he making in those days?
He was making decent money. He was always comfortable throughout his career. I mean, Jackie Gleason always insisted on being the highest paid performer in television. And I think he was at one point was making $1 million, which for then was, like $1 million. It was a lot of money. And Gleason also signed some kind of lifetime contract with CBS that paid him $100,000 a year or something. But Art lived comfortably. He lived in Westchester County here, and then later on, Connecticut by the beach. Yeah. So he was never hurting for money, even when his career, he had a lot of problems with alcohol and depression, and he wasn't working for a while.
It was interesting that a lot of people don't realize that he was the original Felix Unger in The Odd Couple.
Yeah, I love that fact. Yep.
And interestingly enough, too, he got top billing over Walter Matthau on Broadway.
He did. And he did not like Walter Matthau. This is in the book. And he felt Matthau was, doing a lot of stage business, which I have quotes him, but Paul Dooley, I think, in the book saying that he was, and he was throwing off Art's rhythm, and Art did not like him. And he was also at that point dealing with a lot of, his marriage was busting up. He was drinking heavily and he was depressed, and he had to drop out of the show shortly into its run and go up to a sanitarium in Connecticut. And I think Eddie Bracken took over. I don't remember.
Eddie Bracken did come in. Yeah.
Bracken.
Mike Nichols' famous story directing Walter Matthau in The Odd Couple. Mike had done Barefoot in the Park. He was becoming a pretty big director, had been an actor himself. And he's telling Walter this and telling Walter that. And Matthau finally says, Mike, for crying out loud, stop this. You're cutting off my balls. And Mike supposedly said, props.
Yeah, I think he was a little.
One of the great Walter Matthau quotes was where he was asked once, is it true you're a compulsive gambler? And he's a compulsive gambler. I just lost $500,000 betting exhibition baseball. Unbettable.
Getting back to television, when we were all kids, when there were just a few networks and the fall season started, there was maybe 20 new shows. It was a lot to cover for a critic. I read a recent statistic that said last year there were 579 scripted television shows on American television. How does someone like you, Mike, not go crazy with the amount of stuff they throw at you to review?
Well, you just it's easy. You can't watch everything. I mean, you try to pick and me personally try to pick and choose. And particularly if there's a show that's all of a sudden gaining a lot of popularity, like let's say The Crown, then we'll cover that. But just on Netflix itself, there were so many shows you've never even heard of. Like sometimes they'll cancel a show and I'm like, okay, well, what is that? Didn't even know it was on. Didn't even know there was a first season.
Well, I got to ask you because everyone loves this show and I tried watching it and I can't quite figure out how it became a sensation. And that's Succession on HBO. And I gotta ask you, why did this show blow up and become the biggest thing since sliced bread?
I think because there's a lot of real life parallels to the man who owns my newspaper, and his children, and I think people read a lot of that into Succession itself. And of course, the acting and the writing is top notch, and there's a lot of drama. But I think it's part of that whole corporate cutthroat world and children bickering with each other and fighting for control of their father's empire. And, and it rings true in a lot of cases.
Also Billions, isn't it? Same thing?
Billions, yes, but not, yes, corporate greed, but not in so much in the family sense, more in the, two titans going at it from different angles and then coming together and then blowing apart again. And actually, Billions is ending. It might even have ended, actually.
Besides your boss, the Trump family was also at their height at that point. He was president. So I think Steve, I think that's part of it too.
That's a good point. Yeah. It's a good point.
We're in the movie business, asked so many times by people, what are your favorite 10 movies of all time? Whatever. What are your favorite 10 TV series of all time? You've been around TV a long time. What are your favorites?
Well, off the top of my head, and a lot of them are older.
That's all right.
The Honeymooners, Get Smart, Perry Mason, The Twilight Zone. And these are just like among my favorites. I'm just off the top of my head. There's a British show called I'm Alan Partridge with Steve Coogan. Season 1, to me, is probably the best thing I've ever seen. He plays a washed-up guy, talk show host from the BBC who's loses his television job and then starts to do local radio. It's a very funny show.
Mm-hmm. I'll prompt you with All in the Family, maybe.
All in the Family, yes, was a great one. I'm not going to say Sanford and Son just because I wrote about it. It was never a favorite of mine. I mean, there were funny episodes, but it was never a favorite of mine.
Anything better written than the Mary Tyler Moore Show?
That's one of them. That's one of
my
them.
top 3.
How about The Sopranos?
Yes, that's up there too. And believe it or not, this is going to sound really Seinfeld. I like it's been on so much now, and a lot of the humor is dated for its time. So, there are a lot of funny lines there. I wouldn't say it's one of my all-time favorites.
I can tell you this, Mike, it would have trouble on a lot of those shows. Again, they could not do what they've done. They cannot do it.
As would Friends. I mean, as a lot of those, as master of my domain, then I don't think
there is something funny that's going on. I've noticed this lately. Yes, the woke thing has saturated Hollywood, but I've turned on some nighttime animated series recently, and they get away with bloody murder on those shows because they're doing things that make woke seem just like your mother's
What show is that again, Steve? What is that?
Well, there's a show called Family Guy, which has been on for 12 seasons or more. And then there's the Seth MacFarlane shows really stretch the envelope and go severe R territory. Now, this is called adult animation. So this is not what your 4-year-olds are watching, before they watch Sesame Street. But they get away with murder. And a friend of mine was telling me there are some shows out there that are, I guess animation is a different animal. Huh, Mike?
Yeah. I mean, listen, you have a whole network, Adult Swim, which is part of Cartoon Network, where it's all adult animated comedy and sometimes not even comedy, just adult animation. They do get away with a lot, as do like a show called, like Beavis and Butthead. It's sophomoric humor. But they get away. Well, now it's on Paramount Plus, but they got away with a lot when they were on MTV. For their time.
But Mike, was there a show that you were surprised that didn't make it? Was there something that you really got hot on and was shocked that it didn't happen, or anything like that? In other words, of surprise of sort. Even the other way, that something you didn't think would do it went wild.
Well, there were some shows like on Netflix, like the shows like Bridgerton, or which took off, or those young adult vampire shows on the CW, like Teen Wolf and all those kinds of things, which took off, and you wonder how, but they do, and they, you can't if you've heard the saying, if we could bottle it, we'd be millionaires. You don't know, you never know what's going to be good and what's going to hit the public's fancy and what's not. Succession could have bombed, and nobody would be talking about it, but it didn't.
Taylor Sheridan has become a big force with this Yellowstone series and its prequels. Were you a fan?
Not particularly. I mean, Yellowstone's a fine show. It's not, I'm not a big Western person in that sense. I mentioned before, Have Gun Will Travel, which I love. Different era, different kind of show. But, I mean, his shows, he's got a new one coming on called Lawman Bass Reeves. I think it's coming on next week.
Right, about the black lawman.
On Paramount Plus, yes. And again, he can get away with a little more on those shows, not so much on Yellowstone because it's Paramount Network, which is broadcast, but a cable, I mean. But now they're airing it on CBS on Sunday nights, starting
I bet they've been doing some severe editing on that.
That's what I was going to say. They've been cleaning it up a lot.
Yeah. I have to tell you my funny note about Half Gun Will Travel, which I've mentioned to Arthur and Julian. When I first saw that show back in its day, they would flash upon his business card, which said Wire Paladin. I thought his first name was Wire.
I've watched.
Richard Boone was one of the great villains. He could be so good as a villain. And I remember in Hombre, when he takes on kidnaps Barbara Rush and takes on Paul Newman, and he was a real good actor, and I think another classically trained one too. I think.
Yeah, hey, Mike. When in that you're editor of the New York Post, and your column seen by millions of people constantly, I'm sure online or whatever.
That's being kind, but okay.
I'm not. I think so. Between print and line. How much of your day you got to see all these things? Are you looking at all these new shows that come on?
It depends. If I'm going to write about a show, for instance, this morning I interviewed a British creator named Jed Mercurio who did Line of Duty and Bodyguard. They were huge hits on the BBC, and they came over here too, and they did very well. It depends. If it's like a 6-episode series like they do in England, I'll try to watch as much as I can before speaking to these people. Mm-hmm. Either the creators or the actors. If it's, let's say, a sitcom that's going to air on CBS or NBC, you can generally get, and if they send out enough episodes ahead of time, you can generally get a sense of the show, where it's going after 2-3 episodes, maybe 4. And those are easy because they're not as long as the hour long dramas.
So do you view it as a business thing? You sit alone and watch these things, or how do you go about your business?
For the most part, my wife joins me every once in a while, but for the most part, it's during the day or in the morning. I'm watching these shows, and if it's a 10-episode show and I have to talk to the actor in 2 days, I generally can't watch the whole. Sometimes I do, but I generally can't watch the whole thing. But you get a sense of, like I said, of where it's going, and it just makes it a little easier.
Have your reviews gone into the digital verse as well? Because as you pointed out earlier, newspapers are kind of dying on the vine. Not as many people read hard newspapers anymore. Is your material available in other forms?
Yes, everything I write for the Post, 99% of it is, everything that goes into print goes online. Online is the priority now, as I think it is for most newspapers and magazines who are still putting out print editions, and the number seems to be dropping by the day. But the website is the priority. Of course, the print version is important, but they like to get things up on the site as soon as possible.
New York Post has the absolute best sports section, in my opinion.
Speaking of sports sections, Arthur, I have to say this: the LA Times, which used to be a pretty
Bill Plaschke
newspaper, decided this during baseball season they were removing box scores. No more box scores in the LA Times. I'm sitting there because, with me during baseball season, I'm a big Cubs fan. I have to sit there with the page with all the box scores. It starts my morning. It's like morning drive for me. And gone with the wind. Not only box scores in baseball, all sports. There isn't a statistic in the whole paper. It's very strange.
Well, but the thing about the New York Post is they've got great writers.
Yes.
New York Post, great sports section, great page 6, great Michael Starr. All kidding aside, that's the newspaper to me.
What I was going to say was the New York Times, Steve, does the same thing. They don't even have a sports section anymore. They bought this thing called The Athletic, which I think Derek Jeter started years ago. And if you click on their website, you can see maybe 3 or 4 sports stories or bigger takeout reads from The Athletic. But it's very rare where you're going to see, last night's Mets game or Yankees game.
No, but they're online. I mean, they're right after the game.
But it's very hard to read online when you're having your breakfast. It's a whole different thing. But something, I'm in the minority, I guess, because the other thing I heard, the reason that the Times removed all the box scores is they don't want to pay an overnight printing staff because, obviously with the late box scores, which aren't available to you on the East Coast, we would get all of them, and they don't want to keep people on the. So it's a money thing.
Yeah, as is it always is.
Mike, when would we going to see the Rodney book? I don't want to sound like your editor, but when
yeah, right. Get that manuscript done.
Yeah, where is it?
I'm gonna turn it in this spring, so I'm gonna probably early 2025 or maybe even later 2024. Rodney passed away in 2004. It would be nice to get it out in conjunction with the 20th anniversary. You always like to have, like I said before, with the Ringo book. Not always, but it's nice to have a peg. I mean, Arthur knows this with movies and with the Bobby Darin movie. You like to have to peg it to something, a birthday or an anniversary. So it would be nice to get it out in 2024 when Rodney would have been. Let's see, he was born 1921. He would have been 103.
Yeah, Michael, when you get a chance, give me a call because
I will. I want to talk to you.
I'll tell you a story about Rodney, myself, and Buddy Hackett at the Critic Center to lose weight in Santa Monica.
That's where Rodney met his second wife, Joan. As a matter of fact, I was just writing about that.
And she was a Mormon, right?
Yes.
Yes.
She now she runs his estate. They had a very nice marriage for. Yeah. They were together 20 years, married for about 10 or 11. She runs his website, his estate, photos, the whole thing.
There's still action there?
For the website, yes. And there's a Rodney Dangerfield YouTube channel and probably some merchandise.
I'll just tell you very quickly. So at the Pritikin Center, you could go to lose weight. You could go to get off booze or cigarettes or any kind of addiction. So Buddy was there, of course. We had a little drinking thing too, Buddy Hackett. But to lose 15, 20 pounds, Rodney, we asked Rodney, what are you here for? He said, I'm here for the whole menu. And if
You're here for the whole menu.
he was here, come up to the room, go up to his room. You had to climb through the smoke of the pot. He was smoking the drapes. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Tell me that story. I want to hear it.
I got to tell you, being on a treadmill with Buddy on one side and Rodney on the other side, we're trying to walk a treadmill. Unbelievable.
That's when you felt the thinnest you've ever been.
That's true.
It's a good point because yes, Rodney was he went there to lose weight, but also he was a chain smoker. He said he carried 3 different kinds: menthol, non-menthol, and something else around with him constantly. And they did get him over the cigarette habit for a little while. Then he went back to it eventually. But
we'd go down to breakfast and we'd be sitting at the table, all 3 of us, with some other people. And the food was cardboard. I mean, man, it was, what can I tell you? Vegetables, but it was and Rodney would say, let's blow this joint and go to Vito's. We'll get some lasagna. It was always very funny stuff, done straight,
Getting back to Ringo, I mean, the perception is the surviving Beatles, Ringo and Paul, are like Energizer bunnies. They just don't seem to quit. How's Ringo doing physically? Is he in pretty good shape for an 83-year-old?
I think he is. He's always kept himself, and he's very thin, and he's a vegetarian, like Paul. And you have to be in decent shape. He takes the All-Star band around every year, and I mean, he's not jumping around the stage like Mick Jagger, but he's singing and he's playing the drums occasionally. I think he is in good shape. He had COVID, I believe, couple years ago, but he's better now.
Was he a happy Beatle? Was he happy in the whole Beatle thing?
I think he was until the very end. He walked out when they were recording the White Album, and then he came back. George walked out too, so he wasn't alone.
What was he upset about?
He wasn't the original drummer.
Well,
right. That's
what he was.
So he should be damn happy.
Yeah, right.
Did you get the story of when they used to have the meeting? The Beatles would meet at the Plaza Hotel every month to go over the deals. And
tell me.
So the deals were presented. This is a true story. The deals were presented by lawyers. They had all the people there, and all the Beatles would actually be present with their representatives. But Ringo would sit alone. And so the first deal is $82 million, and you do this and this and this, and then Paul would say, "Well, let me just discuss that one second with my representative." Another one would say, John would say, "Well, let me talk to Yoko," and it would come to Ringo every time. He'd say, "I'll take it, I'll take whatever you got,
please, whatever."
Right.
He's also the only one they all picked. For the Sgt. Pepper's album, that famous album cover, they all picked famous people they wanted, the wax figures and everything. Ringo didn't participate. It's weird. I don't know why, but also he and George were sort of their own unit because they weren't getting, for the most part, George wasn't getting the songwriting money that Lennon and McCartney were getting, which was enormous. So I think they always both felt left out, and George had to deal with the Lennon McCartney writing machine. And they might let him have a song on an album if they deemed it good enough. So there was a lot of resentment there.
Did the Ringo book sell a lot?
It did very well. Yes, it did well. Still selling.
He was married to one of the most beautiful women on the planet from the James Bond movie. Barbara
Still is. Barbara Bach. Yeah.
Barbara Bach.
Strangely enough, these showbiz stories are weird. His brother-in-law is Joe Walsh from the Eagles. Well, he used to be.
Really?
Yeah, Joe Walsh married Barbara Bach's sister.
Okay.
So Ringo and Joe are brother.
What a ride Ringo had. What a ride. Holy mackerel. As Julian said, I mean, the guy was like, second in. Can you imagine? Pete Best, who was there. How do you live your life that way?
Yeah, but there was a little bit of justice for Pete Best when the Beatles put out that anthology series in the 90s. Mm-hmm. They put a few of the tracks were tracks that Pete Best played on very early on. So it was said that he made 7 figures from that, and he was able to quit his day job and tour with his own band. So it did eventually. He got a little bit of a taste of that. Obviously,
was Ringo was he actually the next guy in after Pete Best, or was there somebody else in between?
There might have been one guy who filled in, but Ringo was the guy.
Yeah.
Now, Mike, when did he go from being Richard Starr to Ringo?
Well, he started when he was playing for his first band, which was Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. all these guys had fake names like Johnny Danger, Rory Storm. His real name was like Fred Schmidt or something. It was very common. So Ringo became, because he wore a lot of rings on his fingers, he became Ringo Starr. Well, but and then that's how he was known. I don't think he's never changed his name legally. I mean, when he got his knighthood, it was Sir Richard Starkey. It wasn't Sir Ringo Starr.
But he was a perfect fit for the Beatles. Perfect.
He was, I think, in my opinion, the perfect drummer, the perfect personality. He wasn't going to clash with Paul and John, and a little later George clashed with them. And he and George, got along very well. And it was a good rhythm section with McCartney and Ringo laying down the beat. But listen, we wouldn't be. I say this in the book. You can argue all you want in a bar about who was the better drummer, Pete Best or Ringo Starr. We're talking about Ringo. Obviously, he was in the Beatles, and Pete Best after a while wasn't. So
that's it.
You can argue till you're blue in the face. We'll never know how would it
turn. So after Dangerfield, do you have somebody on deck?
I'm thinking of ideas. I don't have anything.
Buddy Hackett. Think about it.
I've actually thought of Buddy Hackett. I heard that I don't want to speak out of school, but he was also could be not the nicest guy, and I think he carried a gun after.
He had multiple personalities. He could be a sweetheart, very smart, absolutely the funniest man in the world whenever he wanted to be, which is an incredible thing unto itself. But he was complex, as most people are, I guess. But
and
I saw the other side.
Stand-up comics are.
What's that? Yes.
When I was doing the Rickles book, I had a chance to interview Shecky Green. He's in Las Vegas now. He was like 94 or something. The guy was sharp as a tack. I mean, he's basically did a half hour of a shtick on the phone, and every once in a while would mention Don in some instance. But he's also an interesting guy.
Michael Julian was in Vegas in the early '60s, and he saw Shecky Green and Rickles in the bars. Julian, you got to talk about that for a second.
Well, yeah, I just the thing that I really loved, frankly, was Louis Prima, Keely Smith, and Sam Butera and the Witnesses in the lounges. And I would see 3 shows a night. I couldn't believe what I was watching. Way before Sonny and Cher, there was Louis. And
Rickles worked with those two, Louis Prima and Keely Smith. When he was doing his show in the lounge, he was working with those two for a long time, actually.
Yeah, it was a wonderful time in Vegas in the 60s. To me, it's turned into Disneyland for adults now, but I loved it as a young man.
You were in that time. It was the golden time, Julian. You were in that second incarnation.
It was great. Quickly, I went to the Frontier to see Jackie Leonard, Frank Sinatra, Frank Sinatra Jr., and the Harry James Orchestra pre-Christmas. Now, in those days, pre-Christmas, nobody showed up. So when a 1,000-seat theater, there are 15 people in the audience. There are more people in the Harry James Orchestra than there are in the audience. And Jackie Leonard comes out after Harry James does a whole set. Sinatra Jr. does a set. And he walks out, puts his hand on his belly, and he goes, I could do this whole show in the Volkswagen.
Well, we have been listening to some wonderful stories from Michael Starr, and who is definitely a frontline critic for the New York Post, and has written about some very colorful characters. I want to tell people who are listening, if you've made it this far into our show, why don't you subscribe? It's free. We're available on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, any of the places you get your podcasts. If you have recommendations or criticisms, please email us at talesfromhollywoodland. That's all one word, talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Arthur, do you have a joke?
I won't do a joke. I'd rather say to Michael that you were a great guest. We loved you here in Hollywoodland. We're going to probably ask you back one of these days and keep up with it. But this was a lot of fun. We all enjoyed it.
For me too. Me too.
We want Mike back with Rodney Dangerfield in hand.
Rodney Dangerfield at the Predican Center. You had to be there.
Thanks, everybody.
You had to be there. One of those things. It was great.
The Earth Station 1 podcast has been bringing your inner geek out to play for the past 13 years. Over this time, we've seen things change in the world of geek and podcasting alike.
And your friends here at ESO are looking to change also. We are now giving you double the fun by coming to you twice a week, and not just in audio, but now you can see our lovely faces up on YouTube.
Join Mike and Mike as we celebrate our 700th episode and beyond. Earth Station 1 is proud to be a founding member of the ESO Network.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.